Hello and welcome to the Pre-Chiro Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Glass. Today we're making a professional chiropractor connection out in Tennessee with Dr. Miles Bodzin. Miles, can you get us started by just introducing yourself, big picture, and also reflecting on that moment in life when you decided you wanted to become a chiropractor? What was it that attracted you to this path? Where were you at in life? What was going on with you?
Wow, that's a big ask there. First of all, thanks for having me, Ben. Appreciate it. And first name basis here is all good. And yeah, many people watching right now may have heard of me. Maybe you haven't heard of me. I've been in this profession for going on since 1994. So what is that? Going on 30 years now. And I've been serving the profession on a bigger scale, probably the last 20 years or so. What got me to chiropractic? That's a great story. Well, I mean, like a lot of us, I think we have a calling that brings us to serving other people. I was studying in school to be an engineer. That's where my path was leading me in undergraduate school. And one day I woke up and realized engineering just wasn't my calling. Even though I was in my senior year and I'm ready to graduate within less than a year and start a career, I just woke up one day and said, this really isn't for me. I think I was following someone else's dream, someone else's path that was laid out for me. And I went on a search to figure out what I wanted. And what I actually did is I went to the beach, lived in Southern California at the time, which is where I lived for the last 35, 40 years. And I started writing a story of who I'd be when I grow up. What do I want out of life? What do I want out of a career? What do I want in my life? As this young 21-year-old punk, not knowing really what to do. And I got some clarity. In essence, I writing out on a pad of paper about 12 pages of notes. And I got some clarity about what was important to me. And after I got that clarity, I was visiting my chiropractor. It just so happened I've been going to a chiropractor since I was 12 on an on and off basis after I had injured my neck diving into a pool as a young kid. And the thought of becoming a chiropractor never crossed my mind. And, it never really was something I was looking to do. But after I got this clear vision as to how I saw my life in the future, it dawned on me that this doctor was living that life. Basically, he was living what I had just got done writing out. And it dawned on me like, wow, I should check this chiropractic thing out. I'm familiar with it. So I did. I went into my school library and looked at a book on healthcare and read about chiropractic. And when I read about it, it basically talked about the fact that the body was this self-healing organism and that the nervous system was the master control system of the body, and that this electrical system, and I didn't mention this, but I was studying electrical engineering. And so it resonated with me. This whole idea of the electrical system of the body controlled it, and that interference got in the way. And even though I'd been going to a chiropractor, I didn't really know that. I didn't understand that concept until I kind of read those pages. And it dawned on me like, wow, if that's what chiropractic's all about, I'm interested in that. That sounds really cool. And that's what kind of put me on the path. And next thing I knew it, I was dropping out of engineering and starting pursuing chiropractic career, and graduated in December of 93. And went off to run a practice. And what's interesting is like a lot of us get out of school and we go associate somewhere and we go learn. And I did a little bit of that stuff, but literally the day my license arrived in the mail, I signed the contract to buy a practice. So I was in practice the moment I had my license on my own. And that led to a lot of challenges because I was this young, arrogant punk thinking I knew everything and had figured it all out, like a lot of us young students getting out of school. And I didn't know anything. I mean, I knew some, but not enough to really be successful in practice. And quite frankly, I struggled the first couple of years. I struggled a lot until I got some direction and I got some help and came across some strategies that improved things. That's ultimately led to what we're doing today. But those discoveries allowed me to have some significant success in practice eventually. And but it didn't start that way.
Yeah, and actually, if we could just stay at the beginning for a little while longer, I would love to tease out some details of what it's like to be an electrical engineering student, and really like what the motivating factors were for you to study engineering. And if we were having a conversation right now that was being listened to by other engineering students, what are some things that we can maybe relate to them in a familiar way? You had mentioned how chiropractic studies the electrical connections of the body, and we can go in that angle. But I'm also just curious because if we're introducing pre-chiropractic studies as a new field of studies that is going to be promoted on campuses that have electrical engineering departments, how can we build that bridge between this pre-chiropractic studies and the electrical engineering cohort of students that are on these campuses?
So if you're that student and you're unsure or where you're at right now, what it was for me was, it dawned on me, I was pursuing engineering because, one, I love science and math and all of that stuff that goes along with engineering. And I had two brothers older than me that were engineers. So I was kind of following in their footsteps. And it was kind of like, I never really explored what it was to be an engineer other than, well, that's cool. Sounds like a great thing to do. And when I really kind of stepped back, I realized I'm more of a people person. I didn't see myself sitting behind a computer all the time, just doing that kind of work. I also found I was an entrepreneur. I am. I've been since I was a little kid, an entrepreneurial type person where, even as a little kid going out and selling, avocados door to door, mowing people's lawns or doing whatever to earn a buck. That was who I was as a person. And the thought of working for another company or as in that environment, it didn't appeal to me. And to this day, it still doesn't appeal to me. And that's why I've always worked for myself. I've literally never as a professional worked for anybody but myself. That drove me. So if you're in that place and there's certain personalities that they do really well as employees and they do really well in that environment. And there's others of us that don't. Like, we are mavericks. I don't want to, whatever term you want to use it. And I, to this day, would not function well in that environment. So, that's what it did for me. And, you're asking what drove it. That's what really drove it for me. When I was back there, I was like, do I really want to, I was in this place where I remember it very clearly. I was at this stage where I was starting to put together resumes to send out for internships. And as I doing that, I'm like, this sucks. This is not what I want to be. This is not how I see my life in the future, of always wanting to have someone else agree whether I should be their employee type of thing. And those kind of things just didn't sit well with me. And that's just who I've always been as a person. I think it's really valuable. And I've had this conversation in practice with parents would bring their teenagers in and ask me to talk to them about their futures and their careers and stuff. Because I would talk about, this subject had come up before with patients, etc. And my comment always was that you got to kind of sit back and ask yourself, how do you want to live your life? Don't think about what you want as a career. Go back and how do you want to live your life? What's important to you? What drives you? Not necessarily what's going to make you happy, but really at the core, what do you find is, for example, I had people say, I want to become an MD and, do emergency room. And then we talked about like, so you're okay with the idea of working through the night? They're like, no, I never really thought of that. I don't want to work through the night. Like, so you got to really step back and ask yourself, how do you want your life to be? And then kind of start with the end in mind and work backwards. And that's ultimately what I did. Is I sat down with a sheet of, like I said, a pad notebook and started writing out, what do I want my life to, what do I want it to look like in 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? Like, I don't mean just financially. I mean, from the standpoint of my day-to-day life, how do I want to be operating? I used to jokingly say, my mom was 42 when she had me. So my parents were older. People often mistaken them as my grandparents, but they weren't. They were my parents. So when my parents retired and came to California in 1984, and I was a senior in high school at this time. And when we came to California, my parents retired. My dad retired, I should say. And I used to jokingly say when I was, that age, I want to do what my dad does when I grow up. I want to be retired. Like and I would jokingly say that. Now I'm not retired, and that's not the point. The point is, though, I wanted freedom of my time. And that was a really important thing for me, even as a, young, Gen Xer from the 80s and 90s. There was no internet at the time to do online businesses. There was none of this stuff to kind of do that. Excuse my cat on the table. So actually, my cat was, was up on the desk here. So, you had to figure out what kind of career you would have. And not that chiropractic led to that, but the point is that it led to me being able to help people, serve other people, and get a lot of satisfaction and joy out of life. It did, in a way that I did not find in the engineering world. When I was sitting in an engineering classroom, the cohort of students was a vastly different personality type than the cohort of students in chiropractic school. Like, one was very analytical, dry, the typical engineering mindset. The engineering students were very different. We're all mavericks. We're all looking to change the world and save humanity, and very different. And that resonated with me much more as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And the differentiations need to take place if we're going to make this clearer as far as the distinctions that the chiropractic path have. I think that the real inspiration behind doing this project is that there really isn't anything that properly contextualizes what it means to be a chiropractor. So if you were a guidance counselor speaking with either a high school or college student who was pre-qualified in a sense that they were capable of making it through, and at least in their eyes, a graduate level education that challenged them greatly academically speaking, how would you contextualize becoming a chiropractor? Maybe not academically, but maybe more just like the soft skills, like being a scientist, a thinker, an artist, a teacher, an entrepreneur.
All of those things you just said, like that's, ultimately the most successful chiropractors I know, in practice at least. Now, people can be successful in various ways, but let's just talk about the traditional path. You go to school, you graduate, you run a practice, or you work at a practice, and you have this overwhelming desire to serve people. You have this overwhelming desire to help people. You want to make a good living. You want to help. You want to work for yourself. You want to have freedom of your time. You do have a good analytical mind. You're able to think through things. You're able to solve problems. The people that I see struggle, and in the position I'm in now, we do have chiropractors who are very successful, but we also have chiropractors who contact us who are struggling. And one of the common things we see with struggle is, or the common things I see among those who struggle are, they're very kind of wishy-washy people. They can't make decisions. They're all over the place. They're over here. They're over there. There's lack of focus. And that's a personality trait they may have. And that doesn't lend itself well to success, at least maybe in other areas as well, but certainly in chiropractic, it leads to some challenges. Being able to be laser focused, being able to be, of service. I don't know how else to put it. You say the artistry. I also say this. You could be great in many things, but you never develop the physical hand skills of being able to adjust well. And I'm sure you've been to chiropractors as well who've been in practice 20 years and they're still doing the same thing they were doing in year one, and they're not very good at what they do. And others who've been in practice 5 years and they've made it a point to study and master what they do, and they're excellent with their hands. And I think, if I was to also say this, I can't speak from a lot of experience. I could just speak from what I'm being told by others as well. So this is third party, that the students coming out today aren't necessarily as skilled with their hands as those who were coming out 10, 15, 20 years ago. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But the point is that I know when I came out of school, it took me a good 2 years of seeing patients before I felt like I was a master at what I did with my hands. And that requires work, and it takes, but ultimately at the end of the day, when a patient shows up to you, they want results, and that results are delivered by these two instruments at the ends of your wrists. And you got to get really good with those. You could have a lot of NFL quarterbacks, but not all of them are Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, right? They're all professionals, but not all of them reach the top. And if you want to be that Super Bowl winning chiropractor, you got to get really good with your hands. And that's part of the artistry.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great message. And I still remember being a student in Dr. Dill's business fundamentals class. You came in, you taught a master class on the psychology of the people that are coming into your practice, how to design your practice in a way that really takes into consideration the psychology of somebody who's unfamiliar, but really also the buying psychology, how people make purchase decisions, how to really develop systems that support a ongoing and long-term relationship with people. And I think that's also another thing to point out to chiropractic students or prospective students, is that you're really developing relationships that are long-term. I can't remember your statistics, but I know that you saw people for years, much longer than the average chiropractor sees people. And I'm just wondering now if you can unpack this concept of long-term care, and how you developed systems that really supported that, and really just kind of maybe give a higher level view and then get a little more granular just to leave people with some specifics.
It's a great question. And, that was 10 years ago teaching in Dr. Dill's class, I recall. So when you talk about that long-term, I go back to when I got in practice, I named my practice the Chiropractic Wellness Center, which is a common name today. It's not a unique name, but back in 1994, there was no wellness centers, at least in Southern California. In fact, when I registered the name at this, with the city, there was no other businesses with the word wellness. We were the very first business of all businesses in San Diego with the word wellness in it. So that kind of gives you the mindset of where we were. We wanted to do wellness type long-term care from day one. Meanwhile, I was met with a lot of objection and a lot of people not doing that. People would come in with their auto accident case or come in with their HMO that I was not part of. And it was very challenging at the beginning until we figured these things out. Once we figured them out, it took a while to do this. And the way we figured what I'm about to share with you out is once we were stumbling onto the things that were creating long-term care, I then turned my practice into a laboratory. This is the engineering me coming out. And I started asking my patients questions like, hey, John, you've been here now a year and a half, 180 visits or whatever it is. Why are you still coming here? I'm just really curious. Can you share with me some thoughts? I'm really want to, like you're unpacking with me right now. I would unpack with them and really kind of get to the psychology of what was going on. And I did this with dozens and dozens of people. And we ended up narrowing it down to a number of things that caused people to stay. But ultimately, one of the ones I want to start off with that was kind of an eye-opener for me was this. I believe we as students and even as young professionals have been lied to as chiropractors for a long, long time. And the lie we've been told is if patients knew what we knew, they would do what we do. The lie we've been told is if patients just understood the value of chiropractic, they would follow us to the ends of the earth. They would literally be our patients for lifetime care. In fact, many of the programs that are, built around the idea of lifetime wellness care are all built around patient education. That's the whole model. And the reason I say lied to is because those of you watching right now, I guarantee you've either, if you're a student, you haven't experienced this, but if you've been in practice, you've experienced this, where you've had patients who understood chiropractic. They got the big idea, yet they're not coming to you anymore. And I guarantee you have patients who do not understand chiropractic and are still coming to you. And I also bet you have patients who know they should stop smoking, but don't, and they keep smoking. And you have patients who know they should exercise and don't. And you have patients who know they should eat better and don't. Meaning there's more knowledge and understanding around what you should be doing to be healthier than there ever has been in the history of man. Meanwhile, people are still not following through. And it drove me bonkers going, why is it that I'm educating, I'm doing all the things I was taught to do, and it's not translating into people staying with me for lifetime care? What's wrong here? And that's the engineer in me goes, there's got to be a solution to this. And that's when I went on the mission to figure it out. And I did figure it out. There's 4 key components. But before I go into the 4 key components or kind of talk about that for a moment, what I'm getting at is that we as chiropractors have been taught, especially with like the traditional report of findings that we all do, that type of thing. We've been basically taught to use patient education as a vehicle to sell our services. And when you brought up the psychology of things, what dawned on me was it's not an intellectual thought. And I want to preface this. I have an engineering mindset. And if you know engineers, we all think of data and stats and numbers, and we don't go off our emotions, right? We're very analytical type people. So that's who I am. And this was a big lesson for me to learn, is that that's not how people operate. What drives people, what drives our patients to say yes to us, to stay with us, to be with us, is not that they understand what we do and they value chiropractic. That's not what does it. What does it is they have a gut reaction that they're in the right place. That's what does it. It's an emotional response that this is right for them. That's ultimately what does it. When I interviewed all these patients, it really kind of came down to that core. It just felt right. It just felt right. And the question then becomes, if you really want to understand this stuff and really learn from it, is you should be asking the question then, well, how do I do that? How do I make people feel that this is the right thing to do? And I distilled it down to 3 emotions that people must have. 3 emotions. And this may be what I taught in Dr. Dill's class 10 years ago. And those 3 emotions are: patients must feel connected to you, they must feel trust, and they must feel hope. It's those 3 emotions that cause them to say yes to you. It's not that they understand what a subluxation is. That's not what drives their behavior. What drives their behavior is they connect with you, they trust you, and there's always this feeling of hope for something better. That's what drives their behavior. And that was a big, hard lesson for me to learn coming from the background that I had. And once I learned it, and I basically put patient education on the shelf, and I focused on creating those 3 emotions, that's what revolutionized things, basically. Now, there's some practical things you can do that cause those emotions to occur, But if you were to distill it down, just like in chiropractic, we distill it down to the 33 principles. The body's a self-healing organism. The nervous system is a master control system of the body. There's these principles that drive what we do as chiropractors. Well, the principle that drives the behavior of your patients to stick with you, who will stay with you for hundreds of visits over the course of many years, what drives that is they feel connected to you, they can trust you, and there's hope. Those three emotions are what drive it. So when we teach doctors to get away from focusing so much on education and instead focus on creating those emotions, lo and behold, their practice grows. Now there's systems you put into place to kind of back all that up, but that's kind of the broad stroke view, if you want to think of it that way, of the approach we take that leads to answer your question. People staying with you for many years and for hundreds of visits. What did that? It's that right there. It's making people feel this sense of connection, trust, and hope. And when you always put that thought into things, or you put that as a focus versus patient education, it's not that you don't do patient education. Just understand, education alone is like putting blinders on. It's like saying, I just got to educate people without seeing all this other stuff going on around you or what drives their behavior. And we're in the people business, right? That's what we do. We take care of people. So you have to understand how people operate, and you have to learn behavioral psychology, or you have at least some sense of it. And when you get that, and you get knowledge of that, and you have some understanding around it, you can then build your systems and your procedures and all of those things you do to operate the practice around those concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I thank you for just going there with us, because I think that pre-framing what it's like to be in chiropractic practice is so beneficial to students before they go to chiropractic school. And I think what you just talked about with the trust, the hope, and the connection, I think that that can be applied at any stage of the life cycle. So right now I'm attempting to create content with you that can actually serve students, whether they're about to graduate into practice, whether they're about to go into chiropractic school, or whether they're just hearing about chiropractic for the first time and they're really just starting to wrap their head around, oh, this healing art, this way to become a professional and take care of others that's different from medicine. I've not really ever heard about it, but the way that this guy is talking about it is making sense to me, and I'm really just starting to understand that I can help others in a way that I never knew was possible, and I'm being given strategies that can be applied. Anyway, I'm just curious if we can just apply what you just talked about. There really is no pre-chiropractic study, so in that is the challenge, but in that is the opportunity. We are trying to build trust, connection, and hope for high school and college students that are wishy-washy. They're struggling. They might be fearful that they're going to graduate college and not know what to do with themselves. And we're trying to meet them where they're at on their college campuses and instill these different psychological sort of awarenesses of like, wow, there's people out there that are going out of their way to connect with me proactively and instill some trust in the process that I can have a structure that I can enter into of pre-chiropractic studies. I'm curious from your vantage point, just to kind of build some context for you, these conversations I'm having are parallel conversations to the different stages. And the way I've teased it out is there's 8 stages of pre-chiropractic studies. So I've asked you some questions that have to do with stage 1 and 2. Stage 3 was what you kind of just went into just now, which stage 3 is the apprentice of like going into practices and what you should observe, so they can go in and observe what you just talked about. Stage 4 is actually starting your own pre-chiropractic club, which is meant to model the experience of what it's like to start your own practice after chiropractic school. I'm curious if you can give any words of encouragement or wisdom of how a student can kind of enter into this perception of, okay, I'm in an environment that has no awareness of chiropractic. I have gone through the experiences and the exposures, and now I'm going to self-express my own pre-chiropractic club with the support of the pre-chiropractic organization and what we're doing. But I'm just curious, from your vantage point, what would you recommend to a college student who's starting a pre-chiro club up? How should they approach the students that they meet one-on-one with and have conversations with and are inviting into their practice or their pre-chiro club? And how should they maybe structure this pre-chiro club to really support the interests and needs of the students at this college level who are immersed in this academic experience?
Well, to me, you want to have something that's attractive for those students to attend. So the first thing you need is food, right? You always need food, right? You always need, when you're inviting people to something, quite frankly, that's a very practical thing, but nothing gets people there like some beers and pizza or drinks or whatever and pizza. And then you want to bring in speakers. You want to bring in people that they would have interested in hearing. That always works, to have some interesting people come in and share their personal testimony of what it's like to be that chiropractor, to be whatever, you know, whether it's chiropractic or something else, to be that, whether it's a business person. To me, that's the best thing you can do is feed them, give them some food, give them some drinks, bring in a great speaker. And then, I mean, it isn't rocket science. I mean, that's pretty much what we would do. You know, if you're talking about a pre-chiropractor, you know, you're in college, this is a pre-group, this is to, you know, get people interested in becoming chiropractors. Ultimately, you know, you're going to have that interest will be piqued by having people come in and share their stories of patients they've taken care of, share miracle stories, you know, maybe bring patients in to share what they have experienced with their chiropractor. Maybe the chiropractor is brought in and they bring in 3 patients to kind of share their experience with what it's been like that kind of stuff. Because ultimately, you know, when you're at that stage, what's going to drive you is the excitement of making a difference in the world. I believe it will. Like, there's other things that'll do it, but like when you're like, wow, I could help people, that's ultimately, I mean, you shouldn't go into chiropractic just to make money. That's not the intention. You're going there to serve people. You're going there to help people. And that's what should get you excited. That's what you want to attract, are those people. So yeah, I mean, to me, it's pretty straightforward. Like any group, you want to entertain them with some food and drinks, and give them something of, you know, to think about while having some good speakers there.
Mm-hmm. And then the next stage is the independent study capstone project. I'm curious if you have any creative prompts on, you know, basically just giving students a way to go deeper, a way to explore something that's of interest to them on a deeper level and make it real, so that when they go to chiropractic school, maybe they now have a clear intention or a focus on what they want to study. They arrive at chiropractic school on week 1 knowing, hey, I want to go study this, I want to go study that, because I spent 3 to 6 months in my independent study project really priming myself and exploring this which is of interest to me.
Yeah, I mean, the simple solution is go visit lots of chiropractors. I mean, that's the best thing you can do. That's something I wish I had done more of when I was a student, even before being a student, was visit many different clinics, many different practices, and just, you know, be a fly on the wall. And doctors all the time will be happy to generally let people go shadow them. And spend a day there, maybe even volunteer to do some work in their office, maybe even be, you know, where they do some fill-in work, go in and say, do you need a few extra hours of work? Like, do something that you're actually interacting. And this is something I would say back when I was, you know, in practice, and people would ask me to, again, talk to their teenagers about careers and stuff. I would say, whatever it is you're interested in, go visit it, go experience it, go taste it, touch it, and get involved in it, because it may not be what you think it is until you're actually in it. And so, you know, no different here. I would say visit lots of chiropractors, and spend time there and interview them, take them out to lunch, do things, you know, to pick their brains and learn. Most chiropractors are very willing to share their experiences. Most are.
Can you give us a day in the life of what your practice was like, how much time you were spending in a given week in your practice,
Sure.
types of people you were taking care of, just tease out as much details as you can about the design that, you know, how you designed your practice and how you were set.
So in my own personal practice, it varied over the years. I was practicing almost 20 years before I retired from practice, but I'll give you the most, the way I like it the most. So hour-wise, you know, it's just a basic question there. It was very part-time hours. I was very busy clinic, but I was very efficient in the way I structured things. I had hours on a Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays from 8 to 10 and 4 to 6 that I adjusted people. So that's 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. And the hours in between were set aside for new patient evaluations, report of findings, which is where you review findings with patients. So I did see patients outside of those 8 to 10 and 4 to 6. But if I didn't have those times, meaning if I didn't have patients that I needed to see during those windows of time, then I was free to have my freedom. I was go to the beach, go surfing, go work out, do whatever I wanted outside of the practice. And then let's see, that was Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays. And then I saw people on Friday mornings, 8 to 10, and Tuesdays also 4 to 6. So I did 2-hour shifts of taking care of patients. And I would see a lot of people within that window of time, very focused, high energy, you know, lots and lots of people. And then the windows in between, like I said, were for new patients or review findings or report of findings with people. And that gave me the flexibility of my schedule. It also gave me the freedom that when I was very busy in practice, and also very busy starting the company Chiropractic, who I'm CEO of now. That's that I do now. When I was starting that software company, there was a window of time where both were happening. They were overlapping. So I was extremely busy, working 12-hour days, super busy. There came a time where I said to my staff at the chiropractic office, no more new patients. Like, I don't want to see another new patient for the next few months because I'm swimming. I'm so busy. So the only way you could do that in a practice was because I was so busy with existing patients that my retention was so high that the practice could afford not to see new people. And the reason I say that is because many doctors never get to that place. They're always needing new patients. They're always marketing for new people because the retention is not great. Going back to the behavioral psychology stuff, when you've gotten really good at patient retention, you become less dependent on new people, which means you don't have to market and do all these other things that occupy time, energy, and resources. So you're able to kind of back off of that. But if I didn't have this other business that I was starting, that window of time is just my time. I go home and play with my kids, go home and relax, whatever I want to do. So it was a very nice lifestyle. So when I go back to that statement I said earlier that I wanted to do what my dad would, which is I want to grow up and be retired. There were times where I felt that in practice, where I was really busy when I was busy, but I had a lot of freedom of time, a lot of freedom and flexibility of my time. So that was so in a typical day, I would show up. You asked, what was a typical day like? I would show up, usually about 7:15, 7:30 in the morning, maybe earlier if I had a new patient early in the morning. I was slammed from 8 to 10 in the morning, adjusting from person to person to person. Came 10 a.m. If I had a new patient or report of findings, we switch gears and switch to that. And if I didn't, I was off doing whatever I wanted to do. And then in the afternoon, same thing. I'd get back around 3:30, start seeing patients from 4 to 6. Adjusting, very busy again. And again, at the beginning or end of the shift, if I had new patients or report of findings, we would bookend our adjusting hours with new patients and report of findings. And it gave us a lot of structure and flexibility and a lot of joy in practice.
If we could shift now into Chiropractic, you said it was a software, you described it as a software. I still remember the first time I saw it in action. It actually kind of reminds me of the artificial intelligence automations that I'm watching today, but it was 20 years ago or 15 years ago that you started it. Can you maybe just talk about what it's meant for the profession, for the professionals that you've been able to support at least, and kind of how it works or why it's important?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to do that. So Chiropractic is the name of our company. It's a software platform, and don't let the name fool you. Chiropractic. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a cash only practice. It's just the name we chose. It's a software platform that helps you be more cash based. It helps you have better patient retention ultimately. And I kind of skimmed over before, but I was saying earlier that when it came to retention, there was these 4 principles I learned from interviewing patients. And those 4 principles we learned were very strategic things you can do. And ultimately, what Chiropractic software gives you is the tools to do these 4 things. So let me just share briefly what the 4 things are. The 4 things we identified that determines retention. Beyond, like I kind of beat up patient education before, right? Patient education is one of the components. It's just not the only thing. And we refer to the patient education component as frequent contact. That ultimately we identified is it's not so much what you're teaching your patients, it's a frequency of how often you're in contact with your patients. That's the key thing, is your name in front of them on a regular basis is really what it comes down to. So frequent contact is one of the things that is required for retention. The second thing that's required, and this isn't any particular order here, but the second thing that's required is feedback. Patients require getting feedback on how they're performing care. If you fail to give people feedback, they will eventually lose interest, especially once they're feeling better, and you will lose them. Doctors all the time will lose patients, and that patient will go somewhere else. And when that patient goes to the other chiropractor, if that chiropractor is smart and asks them, why are you coming to me now? Why are you not going back to the previous doctor? More often than not, the doctor will hear the patient say something like, well, I just don't know how I was doing over there. I felt like they wanted me to just keep coming back. They'll say something kind of negative like that. And that came from the previous doctor's complete failure to give the patient proper feedback. That's why they lost them. So we've identified feedback as a critical component of patient retention. A third component, and it's actually the most important one I'm going to mention now, is forecasting care. Patients need to know what they're enrolling in. People need to know, is this 3 months of care, 6 months of care, a year of care? What am I getting involved in here? Is in essence, what am I committing to? That's ultimately a key. It's the foundation, quite frankly, of patient retention, is basically doing a proper care plan with a patient and doing care planning. If you don't do that, you will always struggle with retention. It's the foundation. So we call that forecasting care. And then the fourth one has to do with payments, the way you accept money, and that's frictionless payments. We need to make the payment experience for people almost as if it's not on their mind at all. We call it frictionless. And the reason we keep using frictionless or forecasting or feedback or frequent contact is because they all start with an F, and it's easy to remember, the 4 Fs. So it's a simple way of remembering these concepts. The 4 Fs are frequent contact, forecasting care, frictionless payments, and feedback. And when you do those 4 things, patients just stay. They feel connection, trust. Let me back up. When you do those 4 strategies and you combine that with the emotions of they feel connection, trust, and hope, you can't get rid of the people. You literally can't get rid of them. They feel it's the right place. They're not being stopped from getting care because of the money. They're getting, all the things that are required for them to be there are happening. And so what is Cash Practice? Cash Practice provides software for doing those 4 Fs. We have a program that helps you forecast care called the Care Plan Calculator. We have a program called the Auto Debit System that helps you do frictionless payments. We have a program called the Wellness Score that lets you do feedback. And then we have a program called the Drip Education Email Marketing Platform that helps you do frequent contact. So we give you the tools to execute these 4 Fs, and you do that throughout caring for your patient. When you combine those systems and those procedures and those strategies with connection, trust, and hope, it's magic what ends up happening in the practice. And it's not unique to chiropractic. This happens for any business that sees a client on an ongoing basis. If that business is in the business of working with someone on an ongoing basis, if they build connection, trust, and hope with their client, and they do those 4 Fs, their client stays around. I apply it to the chiropractic field, and we teach you how to do this in the chiropractic world, both through my software use perspective, as well as a communication perspective. How do you communicate with people? And when you do all of this properly, practices grow. And it's not uncommon for doctors who use our program, who've been with us for 10 years, where they first started their first year, they did 100,000 in collections. Their second year, they did 200. Their fifth year, they're doing 500. And today they're doing 1.8 million in annual revenue. And the only reason these practices grow is simply because they're continuously adding new patients to their practice. And more importantly, they're not losing them on the back end. And that's what allows us to truly deliver the benefits of chiropractic care, is people following through. Because if they're not showing up, well, what's the point? Like, you could show up to an office all day long, and if your patients aren't following through, you're what's the point? Like, you're just spinning your wheels, right? So I always say, if you went to school for 4 years to learn to become a great chiropractor, you better spend some time and energy learning what it takes to help people follow through. Otherwise, you've pretty much wasted your time. So I suggest you learn that while you're going to school, like while you're going through school, learn these things as well, so that you learn how to communicate with people, how to manage people, how to apply these things. And this is why many chiropractors who graduate right out of school, they become Cash Practice clients, and they use us from day one, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Like you said, AI, right? It gives you the intelligence to, I like to use an analogy. Like, if you came to me and said, I don't know how to do bookkeeping, but can you teach me some bookkeeping? I might sit down with you and open up QuickBooks and show you how to use a software program called QuickBooks. And by teaching you that software, you're learning the skill of some bookkeeping. The analogy being is, when you use Cash Practice Systems, our software, you're going to learn the skills that you need in order to apply those 4 Fs. And by nature, by applying the 4 Fs, your patients are going to stay. That's ultimately what ends up happening here. And this is why people use us. I mean, that's exactly why, is we're giving them those tools.
I'm curious, 2 things. One, has your sort of 4 parts of Cash Practice kind of evolved over time to maybe, I know that the same needs are there, or the same ways or principles are there, but the medium of expression might change. Like email traditionally has and probably continues to be the #1 way to stay in touch, but have you guys explored other ways for that constant contact? I'm just curious about that. Any changes over the last couple of years that you guys have made? And then secondly, just imagining that you and I are playing on the same team, Team Chiropractic, and we truly care and are taking time out of our busy schedules to have these conversations for the next generation of incoming students. Is there anything that can be done on behalf of the profession to address those 4 F's, to address the trust, the connection, and the hope of our incoming students, current students, and new graduates?
So, first part of the question, is anything new going on? Well, like, software is always being developed. It never ends, right? I mean, nobody's using Windows 95 anywhere, right? Everybody's on the latest Windows versions, as an example. And Google Chrome is constantly being updated. So the answer is yes. Cash Practice is constantly getting updated with the software updates. That's just the nature of a software business. Part of it is technology evolves and you continue to develop things. As far as, like, for example, our care plan calculator, we're on version 6 now. I mean, it's gone through many revisions over the years and improvements. Our wellness score has gone through numerous revisions. Our drip education system is constantly getting new content added to it for the doctors to utilize. From the standpoint of, like, email, you're right, it's been around forever, and it is one of the best ways. Like, if you have a large list of emails and you want to get some business done, you can blast out and market to your list and you get business done that next moment. I'll give you an example. I mean, our company, Cash Practice, we use email ourselves, right, to communicate with doctors and our members, etc. Okay, so we just did an email blast to our user base for a promotion that we're doing. It's a promotional type thing. And the next day, hundreds and thousands of dollars are coming in as a result of that promotion, as a result of email. So the answer is yes, there's evolution of what goes on in Cash Practice. It's evolved over the years, but the core principles remain the same. In fact, I get asked all the time, are we going to develop other things? Like, are we going to become an EHR, these other types of, are you going to do scheduling? And my answer is yes, we could do those things, but we're not. And we choose to stay in our lane, one, because we work with those companies and we want to stay friends with them. All those EHRs that we work with, they serve their niche and we serve ours. But number two is that our core, it's not our core principle is scheduling. Our core principle isn't EHR. Our core principles are these 4 F's. So we do those extremely well. And doctors will generally use in their practice an EHR along with Cash Practice, and they'll use both programs together. As far as, like, you know, the connection, trust, and hope for, I'm not quite sure I followed the question you asked, so I don't want to just kind of ramble on. Why don't you restate your question as to what you were getting at there?
Yeah, just with somebody that has the experience that you have and kind of the mindset that you have, I'm wondering from a strategic standpoint, if we're considering the chiropractic profession being subluxated because there's some misalignment there at the incoming student level, where students are signing up to chiropractic school for either the wrong reasons or as a fallback option, or just maybe they're not really being catered to in a way that is genuine and like fully taking into consideration everything that's going on with them, because the majority of incoming students are coming through admissions departments that have quotas. You and I are third party, and we really are just chiropractors with experience that have a genuine care for this next generation of incoming students. So I'm just saying, from your vantage point and the way that you think about how to relate to others and care for others over time, what can we do to build systems or to build a better infrastructure for our incoming students to continually serve them, or to meet their biggest pain points or their biggest challenges, help them overcome them, or just make the path a little more, like, create a little more ease in their path? I'm just curious if something comes to mind for you, or if you wanted to sort of just explore that.
Well, I don't know if I'm the right person to ask, and I'll tell you why. I'm a fiercely independent person, and that comes with, I go back to, it's ultimately my responsibility to vet what is my future. But I hear where you're coming from. If you're talking about if there's infrastructure out there that can help facilitate that, so that it's driving the right people to schools. When you say quotas, maybe they're not bringing people in who maybe this isn't the right move for them per se. They're ultimately, I think it's and this is only my opinion, and maybe right and maybe wrong, and that is ultimately it's that individual's responsibility to say, let me back up for a second. If anybody's going to go and say, hey, I want you to spend 300 grand and invest in this thing for the future, you better do some due diligence on your own to decide if this is the right investment, because that's ultimately what you're doing. If you decide to go to chiropractic school, you're basically saying, I'm going to spend $200,000 to $300,000 in today's dollars to invest in myself to go do this thing. You could just as well say, I'm going to invest $200,000 to $300,000 into something else, right? So the question I always come back to is, if this isn't a money thing, this is you on a service level wanting to do this, that's the core thing. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what drives it. So, and again, I don't know if I'm answering the question you're asking per se. I just think at the end of the day, I keep saying end of the day, getting to the point is that person who's making that decision needs to be smart enough to not just go off of one source or one place. They do need to see, I kind of go back to the things you're talking about, of these pre-chiro clubs, and go visit chiropractors. Like if you're thinking of saying, okay, I'm thinking of writing a $300,000 check to go pay for school. Now, I know you're not doing that all at once. I get it. But that's ultimately, if I'm going to do that, maybe I should go visit some chiropractors and check it out, see if I like this thing. Maybe I should go investigate it a little bit, because it's easy to take student loan money and think of it not as your money, because it's just a check being written to you, but ultimately it needs to be paid back someday. And, it's a big commitment. So my point being is I don't know if I'm answering your question, honestly.
Yeah, let me be a little bit more pointed at this. So the majority of chiropractors that I talk to who have been in the profession for 30 plus years, just like you just described that you have been, are a little bit jaded. They're a little bit disenchanted with the direction the profession is going. They're a little bit down on the education system, being controlled by external factors that are maybe kind of watering down or even completely ignoring the essence of what this profession was built on. And as a result, we have an infrastructure in place that is kind of being ignored. Like most chiropractors are a little bit, I don't want to say pessimistic, and at the same time, they're just ignoring it because they don't feel as though they can do anything about it. And with our profession's philosophy being like, there's a relationship there between structure and function, and we're trying to help improve adaptability. If we can improve the structure of the education system by including a pre-chiropractic experience that extends the runway, so that when they're making this $300,000 investment in themselves, they have a whole laundry list of reasons, but they also are entering into an upgraded program from what currently exists. That's another component to this, is like, how are we going to sell them on something that is not really congruent with the current experience that students are having? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, really, I'm just trying to bring some awareness to you as somebody who's in the profession, who's been here and maybe doesn't have this in their mind as being a possibility, and letting you know that it's going to happen, or at least that's my intended focus on making it happen with collaborative efforts with people such as yourself. But I'm just letting you know that this is where I'm at, and this is what I think is possible. And then I guess, like, if I'm asking you a question, it's like, is this possible in your mind?
Yes.
Yeah,
I do. Yes. So here's what I think needs to happen. I always go back to, it's sort of like, basically what you're basically saying is we need doctors to get back to the principles. We need doctors to be able to focus on what makes chiropractic unique and different, and not blend it in with everything else. What makes someone, not watered down, like you just said, that when you hear doctors having this experience, that they're jaded, whatever, that they're not seeing that students are coming out knowing how to adjust. They're not coming out seeing the students have an understanding of what chiropractic's all about, that students are afraid to adjust, that they're being taught to refer everybody out at the simplest thing they see. That's a little scary. Yeah, that is a frustrating thing. How that changes, probably starts from the ground up, of having philosophy groups that doctors and students can go to, local grassroots things that are going to. Maybe it requires new schools being created at some point. But certainly, we also know that these schools, they're answering to both, the money that's available through student loans. We also know they're answering to the outside agencies, like the accrediting agencies. So they have their things they have to deal with. But, from the standpoint of you know, it also goes back to who are the teachers teaching these classes in these schools? Because a teacher teaching spinal biomechanics could be very chiropractic oriented, or they could be very medically oriented. And I recall, you know, you would have a student, someone teaching, you know, a subject matter that was one of the basic sciences, and if that person had an understanding of chiropractic, the way they presented it was vastly different than the person who was just teaching that basic science, who had no understanding of chiropractic. And you know, quite frankly, we look at the world as chiropractors through a different set of lenses. We look at the world very differently than Joe Average. And that it's sort of like passing grandma's recipe down through the generations. It has to be passed. And, you know, a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy eventually doesn't look like the original. You always have to get back to the original. And that's why I believe, you know, me personally, I'll give you a little story about myself. When I went to school, I didn't understand chiropractic to begin with, but I got exposed to the philosophies of chiropractic early in this education, and I resonated with them. And I went to a more medically oriented school. And, but I came out, like a lot of my colleagues, very philosophically grounded. Why? I think it's not because of the school. I think it's because we were the type of people who questioned everything, and we debated things, and we got good at communicating our position against an opposition, versus someone who goes to somewhere where it's just dogma being taught to you and you just follow it because that's what they said. I think there's exercise. I think there's value in having pushback. I do feel that if there is this kind of yin and yang, where at the school, it's kind of, maybe they're not getting it out of the school, but there's outside resources to get it from. And then in the school environment, it's a healthy debate. To me, that's where education is that there's a healthy debate going on. And I remember my clinician, when I was a student in school, when I was in clinic, she was very medically oriented and I was very philosophically grounded, and we had great conversations. We didn't butt heads, but we debated. And that through that debate, I got stronger and stronger in my positions. So, you know, it's like a muscle. You exercise, you get stronger. Versus, you know, I have a colleague I know went to a very philosophically grounded school, and he's not a philosophically grounded chiropractor today. He's definitely not. And many of the most philosophically grounded chiropractors I know to this day went to very medically oriented chiropractic schools, which is very interesting when you think about it. But at the end of the day, I will say probably what we do have in common is there's outside of school resources for getting that, for getting that philosophically and those principles, and driving really kind of the root of what we do as chiropractors.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you going there with me. I also transferred from a medically oriented chiropractic school to a more philosophically grounded chiropractic school, but I'm now adjunct faculty at a philosophically grounded chiropractic school, and a lot of the frustrations that people are seeing of the students is true. It's what I'm observing as well, and I just think that we can do better. I know there's a standardized curriculum for the academic side. I think there needs to be a little bit more of a standardized extracurricular resource that can really be robust enough to appeal to the broad cross-section of interests and demographics and people in the profession that are interested in animals or babies, right, or geriatrics, whatever. Anyway, so as we segue to the end of this conversation, I'm just wondering if you can give us a little sort of wrap up on where you're heading now at this sort of later stage of your career, what your interests are. Are you kind of just scaling back, or are you kind of falling back? Are you still in it to win it? Like, where's your inspiration at 30 years into this? And I guess what's your vision for the future of the profession, if you have one, if you could share some of that?
Sure, I would love to. I think, you know, the chiropractic profession is an amazing profession. I've never met a more generous and helpful group of people. I give you an example. I just moved to Tennessee. I just moved here a few weeks ago, been in California, all of my connections, all of my friends, everything's back in California. And the chiropractic community, I've already got a few connections here, a few chiropractors getting adjusted. Like immediately I have a community to connect with, and it's been very, very nice. I think the profession, I don't have a crystal ball. All I could say is that the profession, if it has doctors coming out of school who are on fire about helping people, that's what matters the most. I will say it scares me a little bit if the doctors are getting more interested in what the medical side of chiropractic is doing, only because of the fact that you lose your identity. And if you lose your identity, I think that's a challenge. I really think that'll be a challenge for for the profession. I think what's required for this profession is to be unique and different, offering a solution. And quite frankly, that's what the public wants today. That's what the public wants. They don't want same old, same old. They want different. They really, truly do. And yeah, I just think that's really important. I also think some of the challenges we may be facing in the profession are not unique to our profession. They are just challenges and changes in generations and attitudes and philosophies. And you know, I'm sounding like an old guy right now, but that's honestly, I think what happens is different generations behave differently. And that may be contributing to some of the things we're seeing going on in the world. And in the profession per se. As far as me personally, I'm not retiring anytime soon. I love what I'm doing. I love serving. I love serving our clients. We have thousands of chiropractors who utilize cash practice. I will say this. I will say this. One of the things I'm really passionate about is helping students and helping doctors, but young guys. And one of the ways we've tried to help is we created, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but we created an inspirational movie for chiropractors called The Calling. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go, especially if you're pre-chiro, go to thecallingmovie.com, thecallingmovie.com. It's a 45-minute movie about becoming a chiropractor, about leaving engineering and pursuing the world of becoming a chiropractor and maybe getting through some challenges and overcoming those challenges and eventually having some success. It's an inspiring story. That's what we've been told. It's inspiring. That's what we did it for. So we produced that movie a few years ago. We said, I got often asked, like you asked me at the beginning, tell me your story. And you get asked often enough, and you're like, okay, eventually you're like, well, can we maybe I'll write a book. Go read my story instead of me telling it over and over. We decided to do a movie. And the movie is our story of how we chose to become a chiropractor, how we went through chiropractic school, how it brought us joy in life, and then overcoming some challenges. Every movie has to have a little bit of challenge in it to overcome. And so we tell the story of some of those, and I think you'll find it inspiring. So I would encourage you at some point, those watching right now, go to thecallingmovie.com and you could watch it. And I think you'll find it very inspiring. A lot of students have told me they've seen it. Some of the schools have shown it to their students. So there's that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for your time today, sharing with the students. I definitely think that this whole pre-chiropractic conversation is new. And to me, like, it's inspiring just to think that we're bringing something new to the profession that really just honors the roots of the profession, but in a new, like, meeting the needs in a way that's, I guess, through mediums that are more relevant to today's student, right? Because yes, the green books and all these other resources have been written and created, but your movie and podcasts and websites and emails and YouTube is where it's at right now as far as information. So
absolutely, you're welcome.